Alistair Finch looked at the waitress standing before him and made a fatal calculation. He saw the simple, starched white uniform that couldn't hide the exhaustion in her young shoulders. He saw the cheap, sensible shoes, the kind worn for standing 12 hours at a time. He saw the plain, earnest face of a girl, barely 20, who probably took the subway home to a fifth-floor walk-up in a borough he couldn't be bothered to name. He assumed she was nobody. He assumed she was background scenery in the theatre of his life. He assumed he could crush her spirit with a few well-chosen words to make a point to his dinner guest. He didn't know that the girl was not just refilling his water glass. He didn't know that she was quietly evaluating the structural integrity of the very financial foundation upon which his world was built. He didn't know that in her mind, behind those calm, observant eyes, algorithms were running, calculating stress points and market vulnerabilities with a speed that would terrify the titans of Wall Street. And he certainly didn't know that by the time the dessert course was served, his reputation would be in ashes, and she would be the one holding the match. This is the story of how old money, caked in arrogance, met the quiet, devastating force of new genius. The Gilded Quill was not merely a restaurant. It was a sanctuary of old New York, a time capsule preserved in mahogany, worn leather, and the hushed, reverential whispers of its clientele. Tucked away on a quiet street in the East 60s, it had been serving the city's elite since the days of Rockefeller and Carnegie. The air inside was thick with the scent of beeswax, aged Bordeaux, and the unspoken agreements of power. Getting a reservation was less about who you knew, and more about who your grandfather knew. Clara Hayes felt the weight of that history in every step she took across the plush Aubusson carpet. Tonight was her third shift. To the rest of the staff, she was just another temp, hired to fill in during the busy holiday season, a ghost who would be gone by New Year's. She kept her head down, her movements precise, her voice a soft, "Excuse me, sir," or "Right away, madam." She was playing a part, and she was playing it perfectly. But tonight was different. Tonight was December 10th, the anniversary of her mother's death. Her mother, a history professor who had adored this city, had always dreamed of eating at the Gilded Quill. She had a tattered copy of a 1980s gourmet magazine review of the place that she would read to Clara as a bedtime story. "One day, sweet pea," she'd say, "we'll go there. We'll sit in one of those big leather booths and order the duck à l'orange and pretend we're Astors." They never made it. A sudden illness had taken her mother far too soon, leaving Clara with a mountain of medical debt and a dream deferred. Now here she was, inside the hallowed halls, not as a guest, but as a servant. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a way to be in the room her mother had only ever imagined. She had used a temp agency to get the job specifically for this one night, a quiet, personal memorial. She wasn't the struggling student the staff assumed her to be. The simple silver locket around her neck, hidden beneath her uniform, was the only piece of her mother she wore. But in a secure server farm in Nevada, terabytes of data bore her digital signature. Clara Hayes was the founder and chief architect of Aurasphere, a revolutionary logistics and biochemical analysis company. Her proprietary AI could analyze the molecular structure of any organic compound from a simple spectral scan, predicting crop yields, detecting counterfeit pharmaceuticals, and, most relevantly, verifying the provenance of fine wines and foods with 99.9% accuracy. Aurasphere was on the verge of being acquired by Croft Capital for a sum that would make the combined net worth of everyone dining at the Gilded Quill tonight look like pocket change. The deal was in its final stages. No one knew her face. She was a phantom, a prodigy who had built an empire from her dorm room, and she guarded her anonymity with a fierce passion. "Girl, over here." The voice cut through the muted clinking of silver on porcelain like a shard of glass. It belonged to Alistair Finch. He was a man sculpted from generations of inherited wealth, his face a soft, pinkish map of entitlement. He sat at table 1, the restaurant's most coveted spot, a semicircular booth that offered a commanding view of the entire room. Finch was a trustee of the restaurant's parent foundation, a position he wielded like a scepter. He was dining with a younger man, a potential investor for one of his funds, and was clearly in the midst of a power performance. Clara approached the table, her water pitcher held steady. "Yes, sir." Finch didn't look at her. He was speaking to his guest, but directing his words at her. "The service here has become lamentably slow. It's the modern affliction. No one takes pride in their work anymore. It's all about the paycheck, the tip. There's no dedication." He gestured vaguely at Clara's pitcher. "My glass has been empty for at least 2 minutes." Clara glanced at the glass. A single sip had been taken from it. Without a word, she leaned forward, her movements economical and smooth, and refilled the crystal goblet. As she straightened up, a tiny, errant drop of water escaped the spout and landed on the pristine white tablecloth, no bigger than a pearl. Finch saw it. His eyes, pale and reptilian, narrowed. He stopped talking. The silence at the table became a lead weight. He slowly lowered his gaze to the minuscule spot of moisture, then lifted it to Clara's face. "Did you see what you just did?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "I apologize, sir," Clara said quietly. "It was an accident. I'll have it changed immediately." "An accident?" Finch repeated, savoring the word. He turned to his guest. "You see? No accountability. It's not an accident. It's incompetence. It's a stain." He tapped a manicured finger next to the water spot. "This cloth is Freta. It costs more than her weekly salary. And she has marred it." Clara felt a flush of heat creep up her neck. Every eye in the vicinity was now on them. The manager, a perpetually nervous man named Marcel, was already gliding towards the table, his face a mask of apologetic terror. "Mr. Finch, sir, is everything all right?" Marcel asked, his hands fluttering. "No, Marcel, everything is not all right," Finch said, his voice rising just enough to carry. "Your establishment, which my family has supported for 3 generations, is employing clumsy, careless people who have no respect for our standards. This girl has just demonstrated a profound lack of training and decorum." "I am so terribly sorry, sir. It will be rectified at once," Marcel stammered, shooting Clara a look of pure panic. "I will handle it." "You will," Finch agreed. "You will handle it by removing her from my sight, and then you will handle it by removing her from your payroll. I do not wish to see her face again." The words hung in the air, fired, over a drop of water. Clara stood frozen, the heavy silver pitcher suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She could see the pity and fear in the eyes of the other waiters. This was Finch's stage, and he was enjoying the play. "Sir, if I may," Clara began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "It was a tiny drop of water. It will evaporate. There is no permanent damage." Finch chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Oh, it speaks, and it presumes to lecture me on the properties of textiles and evaporation. How quaint." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Listen to me, child. You are a temporary fixture. You are less than the salt shaker on this table. The issue is not the water. The issue is the principle. It is about maintaining a standard of perfection, a standard you have failed to meet. Now, are you going to leave? Or do you require a more forceful escort?" From a smaller table across the room, a man watched the scene unfold with a look of bored irritation. Julian Croft, the founder of Croft Capital, was a man who measured time in billion-dollar increments. He had agreed to this dinner as a final, informal step before signing the 9-figure acquisition of Aurasphere. The company's anonymous founder had insisted on this location, on this night, for reasons his team couldn't fathom. He was supposed to be meeting her here for the first time in 30 minutes. He had arrived early to observe the restaurant's atmosphere, and now he was witnessing this pathetic little drama. His first instinct was to ignore it. He wasn't a crusader. The world was full of arrogant rich men and unfortunate waitresses. It wasn't his problem, but something about the girl held his attention. It wasn't just her composure, it was the unnerving stillness in her eyes. She wasn't crumbling. She wasn't crying. She was processing. She looked less like a victim and more like a scientist observing a specimen's bizarre behavior. It was intriguing, and Julian Croft was a man who valued intrigue. Still, he did nothing. This was a test for her, and for the establishment. He would wait. He would watch. Clara felt the locket against her skin. She thought of her mother's stories, of the respect and awe she had for this place. And she looked at Alistair Finch, the man who was a guardian of that legacy, and saw nothing but a petty tyrant defiling it. The anger that rose in her was cold and sharp. It wasn't the hot anger of humiliation, but the crystalline fury of injustice. This man wasn't protecting a standard. He was using it as a weapon. She placed the water pitcher on a nearby service stand with a soft, deliberate click. She turned back to Finch. "You are right, sir," she said, her voice clear and devoid of any tremble. "Standards are important." She looked at Marcel, who was wringing his hands, ready to drag her away. "Marcel, please don't worry. I will leave Mr. Finch's sight. But first, I believe the sommelier is about to present him with the 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild he ordered." Finch blinked, momentarily thrown off by her non sequitur. "What of it?" "It's a magnificent wine," Clara said, her eyes fixed on his. "A wine that deserves to be served with reverence and expertise. A wine that should not be wasted on a palate that cannot appreciate it, or worse, on a fraud who wouldn't know the difference." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Marcel's face went from pale to ghostly white. He looked as if he was about to have a heart attack. Alistair Finch, for the first time in what was likely decades, was rendered speechless. He stared at her, his mouth slightly agape, as if she had just morphed into a dragon before his very eyes. The performance had just taken a very unexpected turn. The silence in the gilded quill was now absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket. Even the distant clatter from the kitchen seemed to have ceased. Alistair Finch's face, a moment ago flush with triumphant arrogance, was now a mottled canvas of purple and red. He rose slowly from his seat, his bulk casting a long shadow over the table. "What did you just say to me?" he hissed, each word a drop of acid. Marcel rushed forward, grabbing Clara's arm. "Miss, please come with me now. I am so sorry, Mr. Finch. She is unwell, delirious." Clara gently but firmly removed his hand from her arm. She did not break eye contact with Finch. "I said," she enunciated with chilling precision, "that it would be a shame to open a legendary vintage for a man whose understanding of wine is a theatrical performance." Across the room, Julian Croft leaned forward, his boredom completely evaporated. This was no longer a petty squabble. This was a declaration of war. The waitress had just accused Alistair Finch, a man whose entire identity was built on his reputation as a connoisseur, of being a fraud. In their world, those were words that drew blood. Finch let out a laugh, but it was a brittle, ugly sound. A waitress presumes to question my palate. A girl who probably thinks terroir is a type of small dog? This is beyond absurd. This is madness. He turned to the room at large, playing to his audience. You are all witness to the utter collapse of decorum. This is what happens when we allow just anyone to walk in off the street. Just then, the head sommelier, a distinguished older gentleman named Luke, arrived at the table, cradling a dusty bottle of wine in a basket, with the reverence a priest would show a holy relic. He stopped short, sensing the toxic atmosphere. "The 1982 Lafite, Mr. Finch," Luke said tentatively, his eyes darting between Finch, Marcel, and the impossibly calm waitress. "Ah, Luke." "Perfect timing," Finch sneered, his gaze returning to Clara. "Let's have a little lesson for the uneducated. You see this bottle, girl? This is not the cheap rot gut you drink from a box. This is liquid history. It represents the pinnacle of viticulture, a perfect year, a perfect terroir, a perfect legacy, something you know nothing about." "On the contrary," Clara said, her voice still level, "I know a great deal about it. I know that the 1982 Bordeaux vintage was legendary due to a perfect balance of heat and late-season rain, leading to incredibly ripe Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. I know that the critic Robert Parker declared it the vintage of the century, causing its price to skyrocket. And I also know that the bottle you are about to open is a counterfeit." Luke the sommelier gasped, clutching the bottle as if Clara had tried to snatch it. "That is impossible. This bottle came from a private cellar auction at Sotheby's. Its provenance is impeccable." "Is it?" Clara took a step closer. She didn't look at the label. She looked at the bottle itself. The glass of an authentic 82 Lafite has a specific chemical composition, a slightly higher lead content than modern bottles, which gives it a unique refractive index. The punt, the indentation at the bottom, should be unusually deep, a signature of that particular glassmaker from that period. But your bottle, if you look closely at the shoulder, has microscopic concentric rings near the neck, a telltale sign of modern centrifugal casting methods not used in the early 80s. She then pointed to the cork, and the cork, an authentic 40-year-old cork, would show significant lateral striation from the corkscrew used for inspection and a certain level of desiccation, even in a perfectly maintained cellar. From here, I can see the cork's surface is too uniform, too perfect. It's likely a younger, high-quality cork that's been artificially aged and branded. Her words fell into the silence, like stones into a deep well. She wasn't being loud or emotional. She was delivering a lecture, a technical analysis, so dense and confident it was breathtaking. Luke, the sommelier, was staring at the bottle in his hands with a new, horrified expression. He ran his thumb over the glass near the neck. His face went pale. Finch was sputtering. "Lies! Utter nonsense! She's reading from some wine blog she memorized. Marcel, call security. I want her removed from the premises and charged with trespassing and slander." "There's an easier way to settle this," Clara said, her gaze flicking for a moment towards Julian Croft's table. He met her eyes, and for the first time, a flicker of something, a question, a dawning realization, crossed his face. Clara turned back to Finch. "Don't open it. My company, Aurasphere, developed a portable spectroscopic scanner. It's in my bag in the staff room. It can perform a non-invasive molecular analysis of the wine through the glass. It will give us a complete chemical breakdown, comparing it to the known profile of an authentic 82 Lafite. It will tell us the exact phenolic compounds, the tannin structure, the precise level of ethyl acetate. It will tell us, with mathematical certainty, if that wine is real or a clever fake made from a lesser Chilean Cabernet blend. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But of course, a man with a palate as distinguished as yours, Mr. Finch, wouldn't need a machine. You could tell it was a fake with a single sip, couldn't you? So I propose a wager. Open the bottle. If I am wrong, I will not only accept being fired, I will personally pay for the bottle, which I believe is valued at over $5,000, and I will issue a public apology to you and the restaurant. But if I am right, she let the sentence hang in the air. The trap was set. It was elegant, brilliant, and utterly inescapable. If Finch refused, he would look like a coward who doubted his own expertise. If he accepted, he was staking his entire reputation on a bottle of wine that a temp waitress had just forensically dismantled. Finch stared at her, his mind clearly racing. He was trapped. His ego, the monstrous, bloated thing that had driven this entire confrontation, would not allow him to back down. He saw his investor guest watching him, a smirk playing on the younger man's lips. He saw the entire room waiting. "Fine," Finch spat out, his face a mask of fury. "A wager it is. This will be the most expensive lesson in humility you have ever learned, you insolent little girl. Luke, open the damn bottle." Luke looked at Marcel, his hands trembling. Marcel looked at Finch, then at Clara. He was a man caught in a hurricane with no idea which way to run. But Finch was a trustee. His power was immediate and absolute. With a defeated sigh, Marcel gave Luke a slight nod. With painstaking care, Luke cut the foil and began to ease the cork out. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Julian Croft watched, no longer a spectator, but a deeply invested analyst. He had been about to acquire a company called Aurasphere for its applications in the pharmaceutical and agricultural sectors. He had read the white papers on their spectroscopic analysis tech. It was groundbreaking, almost magical. He knew the founder was a reclusive genius who went by the initials CH. He looked at the waitress, at her unwavering confidence, at the sheer depth of her specialized knowledge. C.H. Clara Hayes. A cold, thrilling certainty washed over him. He wasn't just witnessing a restaurant drama. He was witnessing the unscheduled, live-action product demo of a lifetime. The cork came out with a soft, muted sigh. Luke poured a small amount into a glass and presented it to Finch. Finch snatched the glass, his hand shaking slightly with rage. He swirled it, held it to the light, and put his nose deep into the glass, performing the ritual he had done 1,000 times. But this time, it was different. His performance was for the highest stakes of his life. He took a sip. He held the wine in his mouth, his eyes closed. The room was silent. Clara watched his face, her expression unreadable. For a moment, a flicker of panic crossed Finch's features. A subtle tightening around the eyes, a twitch in his jaw. He had tasted it. He knew. But his pride was too strong. He swallowed and slowly opened his eyes. He composed his face into a mask of smug satisfaction. "Exquisite," he declared, his voice booming with false confidence. "As I knew it would be. The notes of cedar, graphite, blackcurrant, perfection. Exactly as an 82 Lafitte should be." He slammed the glass down on the table. "You girl have lost. You are a fool and a liar. Now get out of my sight before I have you arrested." Clara didn't flinch. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "I don't think so," she said softly. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out not a scanner, but her phone. She tapped the screen a few times. "My device is networked. I placed a miniaturized version of my scanner under the rim of your table when I refilled your water glass. It's been scanning the ambient vapors from your glass for the last 30 seconds. She turned the phone screen around. It displayed a complex chemical graph, a series of peaks and troughs in vibrant colors. Next to it, another graph was labeled Control 1982C, Lafitte Rothschild, verified sample. The two graphs were wildly, laughably different. "As you can see," Clara said, her voice projecting through the stunned dining room, "the volatile organic compounds in your wine show an abnormally high level of pyrazines, indicative of underripe Cabernet Sauvignon grapes, common in the Aconcagua Valley of Chile in cooler years. Furthermore, there's a trace of synthetic vanillin, a clear sign of cheap oak barrel alternatives. The control sample, the real Lafitte, has a complex ester profile that is completely absent from your glass." She lowered the phone. "The wine is a fake, Mr. Finch. A very expensive one, but a fake nonetheless. And you, with your world-renowned palate, either couldn't tell the difference, or you lied to everyone in this room to save face." She paused, delivering the final, devastating blow. "So, which is it? Are you a fool, or are you a fraud?" Alistair Finch stood as if turned to stone. The blood had drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly grey. The edifice of his life, built on the bedrock of reputation and inherited authority, had just been demolished by a 20-year-old waitress with a smartphone. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The lie was exposed, his palate a sham, his authority a joke. Before he could even begin to process the cataclysm, Julian Croft stood up from his table. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who senses a pivotal moment in the market. He walked over to their table, ignoring Finch completely. He stopped in front of Clara. "Miss Hayes," Croft said, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "Julian Croft. I believe we had a meeting scheduled." He extended his hand. The name dropped into the room like a thunderclap. Julian Croft. Croft Capital. Even Finch, in his daze, recognized the name of one of the most powerful and ruthless venture capitalists in the country. Marcel, the manager, looked back and forth between the titan of finance and the waitress, his mind refusing to connect the two. Clara shook his hand, her grip firm and steady. "Mr. Croft, you're early." "It seems I arrived at precisely the right moment," Croft said, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. He turned his gaze, cold and dismissive, upon Alistair Finch. "Finch, you're a trustee of this establishment's foundation, correct?" Finch could only manage a weak, strangled nod. "Good," Croft said. "Then you'll be interested to know that as of last week, Croft Capital acquired the commercial real estate debt on this entire block, including this building. The foundation's lease is up for renewal next month. Given the lapse in standards I've witnessed tonight, both in your cellar management and your client relations, I'm afraid we'll be exploring other options for this space." He let that sink in. He hadn't just threatened Finch's favorite restaurant, he had effectively announced its death sentence. "However," Croft continued, turning back to Clara, "Miss Hayes's company, Aurasphere, which I am in the final stages of acquiring, has a fascinating hospitality division. Her technology could revolutionize inventory management, quality control, and client experience for a place like this. Perhaps, under new ownership and management, this establishment might have a future after all." The implication was brutally clear. The Gilded Quill would be saved, but it would belong to her. The heavy oak doors of the Gilded Quill swung shut, swallowing Alistair Finch's impotent shrieks. The silence that descended in his wake was not empty. It was a physical presence, a vacuum created by the sudden collapse of a massive ego. It was the sound of a paradigm shifting on its axis. Every diner in the room sat frozen, forks suspended over plates, their Gilded Age tableau shattered. They had come to witness a performance of power, and they had, just not the one they expected. Clara Hayes stood beside the vacated table 1, the epicenter of the tremor. The adrenaline that had been a crystalline lattice in her veins began to dissolve, leaving a profound, humming stillness. She was aware of every detail with a preternatural clarity. The intricate scroll work on the silver water pitcher she had abandoned, the faint scent of ozone from Finch's rage, the way the low chandelier light caught the terrified, awe-struck eyes of the other staff members who stood like statues in the periphery. She felt the cool, familiar weight of her mother's locket against her sternum. It was no longer just a memento. It felt like an anchor, the only thing holding her to the earth as the world she had just remade spun around her. Julian Croft's voice cut through the silence, not loud, but with a density that drew all attention. "Well," he said, the single word carrying a universe of amusement and appraisal. "That was the most compelling product demonstration I have ever witnessed." He approached her, his movements fluid and deliberate. He wasn't looking at her as a waitress, or a girl, or even a victim. He was looking at her as an equal, a fellow predator who had just executed a flawless takedown. His eyes, the color of wet slate, held no pity, only a sharp, gleaming respect that was more intoxicating than any apology. "Your valuation just went up," he stated, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Consider it a bonus for exceptional field testing." Clara met his gaze, her own composure a mirror to his. "The technology was never in question, Mr. Croft. Only the application." "Indeed." He glanced around the opulent, shell-shocked room. "And it seems you have just acquired a new laboratory. This place is a living museum of outdated systems, not just in its cellar, but in its social dynamics. It's a perfect ecosystem for you to disrupt." The word disrupt hung in the air. It was the language of his world, of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. It meant tearing down to build something new. She looked from his calculating eyes to the face of Marcel, the manager, who was inching towards them, his expression that of a man witnessing a conversation between deities he could not comprehend. She saw the fear, the ingrained civility, the lifetime spent placating men like Finch. Her victory felt suddenly incomplete. She had broken the tyrant, but the system of fear that empowered him remained. "Excuse me, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice softening, but losing none of its authority. She turned her full attention to the manager. "Marcel." The man flinched as if struck. "Miss Hayes," he stammered, the name foreign and clumsy on his tongue. I am beyond sorry. I had no idea. What he did, what I allowed." Clara held up a hand, stopping the flow of panicked apologies. "Meet me in your office in 10 minutes, she said. It was not a request. "And please, send 2 glasses of your best non-vintage champagne to this table. The Billionaire Salmon Rosé will do. Mr. Croft and I have the final details of a 9-figure acquisition to discuss. I imagine you'll want to be on your best behavior for the new owner of the building." She delivered the line with a chilling neutrality, a simple statement of fact that landed with the force of a tectonic plate. Marcel's jaw went slack. He stared at her, then at Croft, the pieces clicking into place in his mind with the grinding sound of a world being dismantled. He nodded mutely, turned, and practically fled towards the bar, a man with a new and infinitely more terrifying god to fear. Clara slid into the plush leather of the booth at table 1, the seat Finch had occupied like a throne. The leather was still warm. She did not feel triumphant. She felt a strange, hollow clarity, the way a programmer feels after solving a complex problem, a quiet satisfaction mixed with the immediate awareness of the next, more complicated problem already forming. She had won, but the prize was a broken kingdom, populated by subjects who had only ever known how to kneel. The drive uptown was a silent, gilded cage. Alistair Finch sat in the back of his chauffeured Bentley, the familiar scent of hand-stitched leather and wood polish, now cloying, suffocating. He stared out at the city lights blurring past, but he didn't see them. He saw her eyes. Not angry, not fearful, but calm, analytical, like a scientist observing a microbe. She hadn't yelled or cried. She had simply presented data, and with it had unwritten his entire existence. His phone began to vibrate incessantly on the seat beside him. His business partner, the chairman of the museum board, his ex-wife's lawyer, a cascade of digital vultures already sensing the kill. He let it buzz, the sound a frantic, tinny death rattle for the man he used to be. He had built his life on a foundation of perceived perfection. The perfect suit, the perfect wine, the perfect opinion, all inherited, none of it earned. His authority was a costume, and she had shown everyone, that the emperor was not only naked, but had no idea how to dress himself. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, acidic bile rising in his throat. It wasn't just about the wine. It was about the fact that she, a girl he had dismissed as background scenery, had seen him more clearly than anyone in his life. She saw the fraud. When the car pulled up to his palatial Fifth Avenue apartment building, the doorman rushed to open his door with the usual deference. "Good evening, Mr. Finch." Alistair looked at the man's face and saw pity in his eyes. Or worse, knowledge. The story would be everywhere by morning. He was no longer Mr. Finch, the Titan. He was a punchline. He didn't speak. He walked through the marble lobby, into the private elevator, and into his sprawling apartment. It was filled with priceless objects. A Monet on one wall, a collection of Tang Dynasty ceramics on another. Everything was authentic. Everything had impeccable provenance. He walked to his liquor cabinet, a behemoth of polished mahogany, and poured a generous amount of an obscenely expensive single malt scotch. He took a sip. It tasted of nothing. Ash and water. He stared at the Monet, at the soft, impressionistic water lilies. He had given lectures on this painting. He had spoken of its texture, its light, its emotional resonance. Now he looked at it and felt nothing. He couldn't tell if it was beautiful. He couldn't tell if it was real. Her voice echoed in his mind, a cool, precise whisper of pyrazines and ethyl acetate. She had broken his palate, yes, but she had also broken his ability to trust his own perception. She had replaced his reality with a set of data points he could never hope to understand. He was adrift in a sea of beautiful, meaningless things, a ghost in his own museum. This, he realized with a cold, sinking dread, was a prison far more perfect and inescapable than any she could have designed. He had not been erased. He had been rendered a counterfeit of himself. "You were going to let him fire me," Clara said. It was not an accusation, just a variable she was inputting into her assessment of Marcel. They sat in his cramped office, the air thick with the scent of old paper and desperation. Marcel, who had been wringing his hands, froze. He looked down at his worn desk, at a framed photo of his smiling wife. "Yes," he whispered, the admission costing him dearly. "Miss Hayes, you have to understand. That man, a word from him, a single phone call, and my wife's specialist care is jeopardized. My son's career path vanishes. My pension." He trailed off, his shoulders slumping. "My job for 30 years has been to absorb the shocks, to placate the monsters so that everyone else can do their work. I am the shield. Sometimes The shield has to sacrifice a soldier to save the fortress. You have it backward, Marcel, Clara replied, her voice steady. The staff is the fortress. The patrons are just the weather. You were shielding the building, not the people inside it. That is a failure of architecture. He looked up, his eyes filled with a confusion that was almost painful. Architecture? A system, she clarified. The culture here is a system designed to reward sycophancy and punish dignity. It's inefficient. It produces a toxic byproduct, fear. And fear leads to mistakes. It leads to high turnover. It leads to sommeliers being too intimidated to question a bad bottle from a powerful man. The system is broken. She leaned forward, her intensity pinning him to his chair. I am not interested in retribution, Marcel. I am interested in building a better system. The Gilded Quill is about to become the flagship of Aurasphere's new hospitality division. It will be a laboratory for a new kind of luxury, one based on verifiable truth and radical respect for expertise. The dignity of the staff will not be a liability. It will be our primary asset, our brand. Your new job, if you still want one, is not to be a shield. It is to be an architect, alongside me. To protect your people not by placating the powerful, but by empowering your staff with the tools and the authority to be masters of their domain. But it requires you to unlearn everything you know about survival in this city. It requires courage. So I ask you again, why did you choose to placate him? She wasn't asking about the past. She was asking about the future. She was giving him a choice, not between right and wrong, but between two terrifying forms of existence, the familiar hell he knew, or a new, unproven world where he would have to stand for something. Tears welled in the manager's eyes, tears of shame, of fear, and of a fragile, terrifying hope. Because I was a coward, he said, the words raw and honest. I have been a coward for a very long time. Good, Clara said, a flicker of something like warmth in her eyes. Honest data is the only place to start. The rebuilding began the next day. It was not a renovation of velvet and brass, but of purpose. Clara's team moved with quiet efficiency. They didn't just install scanners in the cellar, they installed a culture. Luc, the sommelier, initially resistant, became her most fervent convert. The handheld scanner became an extension of his own senses. He discovered that 2 entire cases of a prized Burgundy were subtle fakes, their provenance papers expertly forged. He felt a mix of horror and exhilaration. He had spent his life in thrall to myths and labels. Now he was a purveyor of empirical truth. He began holding provenance classes for the waitstaff, teaching them to read the molecular signature of a wine as easily as they once read a customer's mood. The kitchen staff, led by Chef Antoine, was revolutionized. Aurasphere's technology allowed them to trace every ingredient to its source, analyzing soil composition from the farm that grew their tomatoes, the salinity of the water where their oysters were harvested. It was a chef's dream. They weren't just cooking food, they were curating a verifiable story on every plate. The change was hardest for the front-of-house staff. Some veterans, fluent in the old language of obsequiousness, couldn't adapt. They quietly resigned, replaced by a new generation drawn by the restaurant's burgeoning reputation as a place of integrity. The new rule was simple and absolute. The staff's expertise was to be respected. Any patron who treated a member of the team with the kind of disdain Finch had shown would be politely but firmly asked to leave and never return. The first time Marcel did it, ejecting a hedge fund manager who had snapped his fingers at a busboy, he returned to the kitchen shaking, not with fear, but with a giddy, unfamiliar sense of power. 3 months later, the Gilded Quill held its reopening. The room was the same, yet entirely different. The oppressive silence of old money had been replaced by a vibrant, confident hum. The energy was electric. Clara stood not at the entrance, but at a quiet table in the corner, the one where Julian Croft had first watched the drama unfold. He sat across from her. Their deal was done, making her a titan in her own right. But their conversations continued, a relentless, exhilarating chess match. "You've weaponized dignity," he observed, watching a waiter explain the terroir of a cheese to an engrossed table. "It's a bold market strategy." "Truth is a powerful brand, Julian," she replied, taking a sip of water. "You, of all people, should know that." Her attention was drawn to the main door. An elderly man with a kind, academic face was being shown to a table. It was Dr. Alistair MacLeod, her mother's former mentor and a celebrated historian from Columbia University. Clara had invited him personally, a quiet tribute. Later in the evening, she approached his table. "Dr. MacLeod, I'm Clara Hayes." The old professor's eyes lit up. "Ah, yes, Eleanor's daughter. My goodness, you have her eyes. She spoke of you constantly. Her brilliant girl. She would be so astonished to see you here. She adored this place, you know. To her, it was a perfect, preserved piece of history." "That's why I wanted you to be here tonight, Professor," Clara said. "I wanted to show you what we've done with it." She gestured to Luke, who approached with a single, dusty bottle of wine. It was another 1982 Lafitte Rothschild. A murmur went through the nearby tables as people recognized the legendary vintage. Luke placed the bottle on the table and produced the sleek, silver aurasphere scanner. He aimed it at the bottle, and on a tablet he held, a complex graph bloomed into existence, its peaks and valleys a perfect match for the control sample. "This bottle," Luke announced, his voice resonating with a new, profound confidence, "was born of a perfect summer on the banks of the Gironde. The data shows us a tannin structure of remarkable integrity, and the ester profile tells a story of 40 years of slow, graceful evolution in a perfectly controlled environment. Its history is not a matter of opinion or reputation. It is a verifiable fact." He opened the bottle, not with the hushed reverence of a priest, but with the proud precision of a scientist presenting his findings. He poured a glass for the professor. Dr. MacLeod took a sip, his eyes closing. "Remarkable," he breathed. "It tastes true." He looked at Clara, his gaze filled with a deep understanding. "Your mother loved history, my dear. But she always taught that we must not worship it. We must interrogate it, understand it, hold it to the light. You haven't just preserved her dream. You've improved upon it. You've illuminated it." Clara returned to her table, her heart full. She looked around the room, at the confident staff, the engaged patrons, the seamless marriage of tradition and technology. She had come here as a ghost to honor a memory in a place her mother could only dream of. But she had discovered that the greatest way to honor the past was not to embalm it, but to build a better future from its foundations. The Gilded Quill was no longer a sanctuary for men like Finch. It was a testament to a new standard, where the most valuable commodity was not inherited wealth, but earned brilliance, and where perfection was not the absence of a flaw, but the unwavering presence of the truth. She felt the locket, cool against her skin, and for the first time, the memory of her mother felt not like a loss to be mourned, but a legacy to be built upon. And it was only the beginning,